Hi, my name is Tim, and this is my class on how to avoid terrorism and not become a victim of it. Just a little bit of who I am. I'm a Marine who served in the global war on terrorism with a couple of deployments and a few years in private security. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, but I haven't been very diligent about doing it. It's more for like friends and family and whoever they want to share it with. But if anybody else wants to see it, then here it is. I originally wanted to do a higher quality video, but I kind of am short on time, and I'm sacrificing video quality to just get the information out. It seems like there's an increase in terrorist activity, so I'm just gonna do my best with the slideshow and hope it works. If you think that I missed something, which I probably did, leave a comment or suggestion. I might make a better video later. Also, go read the comments just in case there is something I miss. Someone might have left something there that I missed and would be good information. And you can also call me doo-doo head or cran eater or whatever you want there too. And again, sorry for the low quality. The intent of this video is to make something everyone can use and not become a casualty. It's for educational purposes, intended for all audiences. It's not specific for one politics or ideology. These steps are for anyone, anywhere, people can take to avoid becoming a victim of terrorism. Um, what I'm going to be going over today, the learning objectives, is to first define terrorism, about total avoidance, daily planning, route planning, and situation awareness. Second part of the video is going to be hostage situations, active shooter situations, protests and riots, IEDs, and the mantra I want to kind of say, or maybe the motto I should say, would be aware, prepare, and think outside the box. Terrorism could be described as a word with a dynamic definition based on current events and the opinion of people who are defining it. Another good way to put that would be one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. I have seen other definitions include cases of monetary gain. So we're going to go ahead and stick with the definition, the academic definition, as well as how the FBI defines terrorism. Academically, it's defined as a doctrine of fear of generating coercive political violence, including calculated demonstrated violence against mainly civilians, performed by propagandistic and psychological effects. The FBI defines it as unlawful use or threatened use of violence against some persons or property to intimidate or coerce government or civilian population in furtherance of political or social objectives. Those are just the basic definitions, just so you're aware, and it does kind of help to be able to recognize it and see what kind of situations may occur from that, just to try to get you in the mindset. Now, total avoidance is kind of a term that I made up. Basically, if you live under a rock like this guy is, out in the middle of nowhere, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to become a victim of terrorism. It just won't happen. But mostly what I want to stress is total avoidance is if you're not where terrorism is possible to happen, that's not going to happen to you. The question I want you to ask constantly is it worth the risk to go to a place or event or to go to a crowded area? Things to look for are like recent events. Is there a lot of crime? Is there a lot of protests or unrest there? Also look for increased security measures or law enforcement. Generally speaking, you won't see a lot of security guards or law enforcement patrolling an empty field. There's always, they're always patrolling somewhere where there's an increased risk. So I wouldn't necessarily say you want to avoid where cops go, but if there's an increase in law enforcement or security guards or security measures in general, keep that in mind. You might not want to make that part of your daily planning. And there again, the easiest way to avoid being in a terrorist situation is no concerts or events, no crowds or anything like that. I realize that's not very fun, and it's not a reality we can really live in. We'll eventually have to go somewhere where there's a crowd or something like that. One thing you can do is go to those places at low peak times. For example, like the DMV. Maybe go at 10 o'clock in the morning when nobody's there, or something along those lines. And a lot of times you can look up on Google if uh, you can look up when there's a lot of people there and when there's not. All right, and then what you want to do is have a daily plan of where you're going to be, how you're getting there, and things like that. So make it a habit. So one thing you can do is make it a habit to look at the local news feed. You want to look at local news more than national news for this situation, because they're going to be a little bit more responsive immediately to what might be perceived as a small situation on a national level or even a state level. The word of mouth is going to travel a lot further to them, and they're going to report it faster because they're just in the local area. Things like that. So making sure you listen to the news, not necessarily all the time, but look up their website, look through the headlines, see if there's anything crazy going on. Also, always have an agenda of your day. You're going to be at this place from about this time to this time. Plan how you're going to get there, how you're going to get back, how you're going to get to in between two different spots. Just kind of make it a daily habit. You don't necessarily have to have a strict agenda, but you do need to have at least a general idea and try to stick to it. Just try to stick to a plan. Just try to make this a daily habit to do. Another thing I want to say is a lot of law enforcement, security guards, military guys know this term called complacency kills. You want to avoid complacency, so always be aware, prepare, and think outside of the box. Just constantly have that mindset of, complacency can kill. Make sure you're safe. Even though it seems safe every day, it happens. Every day is a possibility that where something can happen. 9 times out of 10, you will probably never encounter a terrorist situation in person, at least here in the United States. But it's always smart to have a plan, be aware, prepare, and think outside the box. All right, now the next step is we're going to talk about route planning. This is how you get to and from, like your work, your grocery store, and things like that. If you don't have best thing to do, best tool you can have is probably Google Maps or Google Earth. You can look at different roads to connect it. It will also give you different routes that you can take. If you just say, hey, go here, it'll show you different routes that you can take. I would recommend taking the extra time to travel those roads and streets that you wouldn't normally travel to keep yourself informed of how they have changed and what to expect when you travel them. I would say probably do that maybe once every week, maybe every 2 weeks. You don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to be, paranoid. Oh, I always take a different road to work and stuff like that. You can if you want. I guess it kind of breaks up your day too if you're feeling like your life is a little bit mundane, but definitely do it often enough where you're informed about how the roads have changed. Maybe cars are parked differently, stuff like that. If you're new to doing this, try working with a location you're already very familiar with. You probably already have gone down a different road just to avoid traffic. And it's kind of like home territory for you, so you already know generally that you can take a different road somewhere. And then you can just expound upon that to different locations that you don't normally go to. Another thing I'd recommend too is taking a defensive driving class. They're really good about how to recognize, road dangers as well as, maybe even terrorist issues, possibly. But the other thing too is it keeps you a little bit more aware. It helps you with your awareness. And depending on your insurance company, you might even save some money on your premiums. The other thing you want to watch out for are large crowds of pedestrians. There again, that's part of total avoidance. You want to stay away from large crowds. Crowds are the #1 target of terrorists. They like to have their mass casualties is basically what they're looking for. Now, if for some reason you find yourself using public transit systems, I'm going to refer you to my super nice little illustration here. This is supposed to represent basically a bus. This is how most buses I've seen, not that I've seen a ton of them, but most buses I've seen are set up. You generally have two doors on the curb side. Driver, if you're in the U.S., is obviously going to be on the left side of the door. Obviously, if you're somewhere else, it might be flipped. But basically, the safe zone you want to find yourself in is if you're having to use public transportation is in between the two doors. This gives you options. Having options is a little bit like route planning for when you're driving. It gives you two ways you can escape. For example, if something happens at the front of the bus, you can quickly go out the back. One thing I would also recommend too is being a standing pedestrian if you can. It gives you a little bit more. It gives you extra time to react to situations. You're already on your feet. You can already move, rather than trying to get to your feet and then move. However, most buses don't like you to be standing if you don't have to be, if there's enough room to sit. But if you can, I would recommend standing. Now, sitting does have the advantage of being inconspicuous. So if you're wanting to maybe not be different from the crowd, you can always kind of blend in a little bit more with the crowd if you're sitting. Now, if for some reason you can't be in this safe zone, try to sit as close to the exit as you possibly can. There again, it's the quick exit if nothing else. The other thing too is look for other buses that you can take. Usually, if you're in a place that has public transportation, there's generally more than one option you have. Most of the time, of course, these smaller places might not have as many. You might have the only bus, but if you can, look for other bus routes or other tram routes or anything like that. And also, if you can, always travel with somebody, especially on these public transit areas. It's just you have more people having an extra set of eyes and ears is always nice. You might not see something that's happening that they do. Now, when traveling, air travel, using commercial air travel, this can be a little bit tricky, but usually it's one of the safer modes of traveling. Especially seems how a lot of airports, especially since 9/11 in the United States, has a lot of security. Very few other places have more security than airports do. But what you want to keep in mind is using your route planning skills to get to and from the airport, for example, to your hotel, or anything like that. As far as like long layovers, I would recommend staying. For example, if you have a 4 or 6 hour layover, recommend staying in the airport. I wouldn't recommend leaving. But if you do, try to do your route planning as best you can and see if there's multiple ways to get back and forth. Make sure you do your route planning for like all your tourist spots that you're going to, or if you're traveling for business from your job site or something like that. There again, if you don't have to travel alone, don't. In my opinion, safety doubles just by having another person with you. And always use your situational awareness, which is what we're about to get into. And there again, be aware, prepare, and think outside of the box. All right, for situational awareness, I like to use the simple look, listen, and smell method. For looking, you want to look for people being suspicious, such as doing things that aren't in the norm for the people in that area. Are there armed people around? Some people do concealed carry, especially in the U.S., so don't freak out if they are, but do keep them in mind as you travel with them. You might make sure that they don't draw their concealed weapon. Things like that. Just kind of understand that they're there. Don't necessarily stare them down, but just understand that they're there. And Also look for like large groups of people that seem to be traveling together. Again, 90% of the time they're not going to be up to anything, but they're probably just going to the same party or going to the same concert or something like that. Just keep in mind that they're together. Try to like ascertain what they're doing, and this is where listening comes in a little bit more. Listen to what they're talking about. If they're talking about the concert, then they're probably going to a concert. But if they're talking about doing something, that's probably a good sign that you want to go ahead and get away from them. Something you might want to hear, or something you might hear is, "Hey man, we planned for this. Are you ready?" You know, if they start saying language like that, just kind of keep aware of what they're saying. I can't stress this next point enough. Don't wear both headphones. I would recommend using at least one to keep yourself entertained while you travel, but also if you have to use 911 to call emergency services, your hands are free and you can still talk and use your hands to help your escape. And then the smelling part is you're looking for something that smells abnormal. Is something burning? Do you have a strong chemical smell? Any sort of smell that's out of place. There again, just be aware, prepare, and think outside of the box. Now, unfortunately, terrorist situations do happen. What we covered just now was basically how you can avoid them and things like that while you're traveling or while you're at your destination or anything like that. Now, the second part of this is going to be if you find yourself in these situations. Unfortunately, they do happen, but that's why we are aware, we prepare, and we think outside the box. So here's some tips that might help you with the more common ones that might happen. Hostage situations are probably the more common ones. Common things that you can find yourself into as far as terrorism goes. If you find yourself in a hostage situation, follow the 3 C's: calm, connect, and capitalize. Staying calm is important, even though it can seem next to impossible because your life is literally being threatened. It's human nature to not be calm in that situation, but do whatever you can to remain calm. One of the main reasons why you want to remain calm is it also helps your captors remain calm. If you have a frantic outburst for some reason, they might have a frantic outburst and take it out on you. So you might become a victim in that manner. But if you're calm, then there's less likely chance that they're going to do something that they didn't originally plan to do. One thing to keep in mind is your adrenaline might be pumping, but so is theirs. They're in a stressful situation. Granted, they did start it, but it is a stressful situation. People do weird things when they're in stressful situations. Being calm in the situation might help them remain calm as well. One of the easiest ways is you can kind of chemically induce a little bit of calmness into your body by doing a breathing exercise called 5 and 5. Breathe in for 5 seconds and breathe out for 5 seconds. There again, it's called the 5 and 5. Kind of puts your body into a calmer state of mind. Next thing you want to do, if you can, if they allow you to talk at all, and it might be a little bit tricky, but if you can connect to your captors, they are less likely to harm you. Studies that I have seen about, people ending other people's lives is they generally are less likely to harm someone that they know versus someone that they don't know. This kind of, if you can connect with your captors, it kind of does like a reverse Stockholm syndrome. You can do this by looking for things that you both relate to, have a conversation about it. Look for like little small things, like if for some reason they're married and you're married, you can kind of talk about your marriages and maybe how crazy the wife can be sometimes. Something to start a conversation. If you can connect with them, there again, your chances of survival increase. And while they might cause harm to the group of hostages that you're a part of, they might not do it to you first. It's kind of a messed up way of thinking about it, but it buys you yourself time. That's where the capitalization comes on it. While you're encouraging a negotiated release, you're going to try to negotiate and, being one of the first people to get released or some other peaceful conclusion, so that way you can get out first. And that's why you have that connection. That's why you built that path of empathization. Always remain alert for like your rescue efforts or escape opportunities. And if you see them, then capitalize on them. All right, next part of the hostage situations is one thing to think of is if you are in this situation, think as your fellow hostages as your team. You want to work together as a team. So you want to, have you seen a way to escape? Have you seen anything weird talking to your fellow captives or hostages, I should say? Another thing you want to kind of do is you're going to have to prioritize who you want to escape first, basically. For example, like if you're by yourself out with friends, you might want to prioritize yourself over your friends and then other hostages, something like that. Or if you're out with your family, you might want to do it a little bit differently and say your kids first, and then your wife or husband, and then yourself. However you want to do it, just make sure you have a prioritized list. Justify it however you want, obviously, but make sure you have a list so that way you can say, okay, number 1 is more important than number 2, and number 2 is more important than number 3. It's kind of a rough situation, but you're already in a rough situation. This helps you make a plan for your escape. That's basically what you're trying to establish, or escape for as many hostages as possible. The next step that you want to make sure you're doing as you're a hostage is you want as much intel that you can collect for law enforcement or military if you're in that kind of a situation, for any sort of rescue efforts or negotiating efforts. You want to see if they're wearing any uniforms, what kind of uniforms they are, what kind of weapons do they have, do they have any sort of explosive devices, are there any countermeasures they have in place in the event of a rescue operation? For example, have they barricaded the door or something like that? Do they have a guy who's mounted a machine gun to create what's basically a fatal funnel for the front door if they go for the front door? Excuse me. What language are they speaking? It doesn't have to be perfect as far as identifying the language. A close guess is good enough. Who's in charge? Maybe some heights and weights of the different hostage takers. Some of the names that are used. Any sort of detail is going to be probably useful for law enforcement. Also pay attention to the details of your hostages. How many are there? You don't have to have an exact count. Saying the difference between 5 and 20 is helpful. If you can't get an exact count, then great, but at least have an understanding of how many. Are there any with disabilities or any that were injured during the operation to take you guys as hostages? That's good information, so that way when they do a rescue effort, they know the capabilities of the people that are being rescued. Also, getting the height and weight of most of your hostages. I would leave out like the average ones. If you happen to notice someone who is a little bit more overweight than most people are, then you might want to bring that up. See if you can get their names, so that way they can identify who's in there. Again, any details are going to help with the rescue or negotiation. All right, so the next one is going to be the active shooter. The best way to survive this situation is to do these 3 things in order: evacuate, hide, and fight. Now I say you want to do this in this order. You want to evacuate first if you can. If you can't do that, then you want to hide. If you can't hide, then you fight. Go back to those 3 things just in a little bit. I'm going to break them down a little bit more. Evacuate. If you hear gunshots in a place that doesn't usually have gunshots, just leave. There's no reason to be there. I would recommend getting at least a block away or about a quarter mile. You don't necessarily have to go that far, but the farther away, the better. for sure. But I would put that quarter-mile distance as your goal. And as you're leaving, if law enforcement is already responding to the situation, make sure they can see your hands and that you're not armed. Now, if you happen to be concealed carrying and you're not responding to the shooter, which is totally up to you. You don't have to respond to an active shooter if you're armed. It is not incumbent on you to do so. In fact, if they're better armed than you are, you might not want to. If you are armed, as you're coming out of the situation, make sure you announce it to law enforcement. Don't show that you have a weapon. Just let them know that, hey, I do have a weapon on me. Make sure they know it. That way they can process that you have it. They're probably going to separate you from the weapon, obviously, for obvious reasons, and maybe detain you for a little bit, but just make sure that they are aware of it from the get-go. So that way they can deal with that situation quickly and effectively and not cause you any harm in the process. All right, if you can't evacuate, what you want to do is hide. Now, there are situations where you might not be able to evacuate because the shooter is blocking the exit. Something you want to consider when you're hiding is there is a difference between cover and concealment. Now, cover is something that will stop bullets, essentially. Whereas concealment will just hide where you're at. The shooter can't see you. So cover is used for stopping the bullets, and concealment is stopping the shooter from being able to see you. You always want to prioritize your cover as it protects you from the bullets, whereas concealment just hides you. And keep in mind that bullets do go through walls, at least most walls, especially drywall. One of the best places to hide is either a closet that you can lock or an office that has blinds on the windows that you can also lock. Most of the time, for most active shooters, they will not try to, they're trying to do general casualties rather than trying to go for anyone specific. Sometimes that's not the case, but if you can lock it, usually they'll see if they can open the door. If they can't open the door, they usually just move on to somewhere that has a softer target. But if for some reason they do try to get in and they start actually getting in, this is where the fight starts to play into it. Obviously, this is the highest risk action because you're engaging with the person that's trying to end you. But it might be the only way. If that's the only way, the best thing you can do is look for an improvised weapon, like something long and heavy. I like to say the words long and heavy for an improvised weapon. And when you're using this weapon against another person, like you're swinging for it, you're swinging for their head as best as you can. If you can hit them in the head, you have a better chance of winning because it's going to have a better chance of disorienting them. Your main goal is to separate them from their weapon. If you can separate the shooter from their weapon, they are no longer a shooter. Problem solved, right? If you can do that, that's going to help you a lot for your survivability. Now, I would recommend that if you can subdue them, make sure the weapon stays well out of arm's reach. I would recommend at least 10 to 20 feet. The farther away the weapon is from them, the harder they have a chance of regaining that weapon and then using it again. Now, once you start this fight, don't give up until they are just completely subdued and they cannot function, or they are so unwilling to function that they've surrendered completely. Either way, make sure they stay subdued until law enforcement approaches the situation, and then they let them handle it after that. All right, now I'm approaching a little bit of a sensitive subject because there are more protests happening lately. The main thing I want to focus on is how to keep yourself out of situations that are going to be violent towards you. And I will say there are reasons to protest the government or a company. In fact, the last protest story that I heard about, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago, there was a lady that was protesting outside of a company because she didn't like a certain policy. Turned out the one of the account executives that works there, having to notice her protesting, kind of started a conversation with her, and they were actually able to change the policy and try to kind of rectify it. So protests have their time and place for sure. So this isn't an anti-protest thing. But what we're going to focus on is the violence part. Now, the best way to do this is probably to recognize the difference between a protest and a riot. So you can actually define them a little bit different. A protest, if you want to protest, you are participating in a public demonstration in opposition to something, pick whatever that something is. A riot is different, is because it's a violent disturbance of the public peace by 3 or more persons assembled together that presents a danger of injury to a person or property. There again, the main thing is violence. So what we're going to be focusing on here is how to avoid situations that might put you into a riot if you do happen to want to go to a protest. There again, this could be an opportunity for a terrorist group that might not even have any sort of allegiance to what you're protesting. It could just be someone who is just wanting to take advantage of the situation because it's a large group of people. All right. And then, so what we're looking for is, if you can, identify who and how the organization that's putting on the protest is doing it. So you want to kind of know who they are, obviously. Get an idea of what their mission statement is for their organization. If it involves violence or taking over something or something like that, try not to, you might not want to go to that particular protest. If it involves anarchy as well or violence or anything like that, are they from the area or locality that they're protesting? For example, you probably, someone is protesting here in America, but they're from the UK. That's kind of weird. Might be a protest you want to ignore or stay away from. The other thing you want to recognize is, how do they normally protest? Is there usually violence that occurs while they're protesting? And this does include vandalism. You want to avoid anybody who's doing like spray painting or something like that. Generally speaking, if they're willing to deface property or cause property damage, it's a very quick leap to start causing bodily harm to somebody else. Are they constantly trying to stop traffic? Are they like trying to fight the police or something like that? These aren't the kind of protests you want to go to if you want a total avoidance of violence or being a victim of terrorism. If basically there's any hint of violence in what they're doing, just avoid it. It's not really worth it. It just is putting you in a position of danger that you don't really need to be, is my recommendation. There again, these demonstrations and riots, I'm just going to call them riots, happen in places where we need to go are public offices. So unfortunately, even if you're not participating, you might need to go there anyways. There again, you want to use your route planning skills and your situational skills. Look for people protesting in the middle of the road or approaching the buildings that they are protesting, and vandalism. You want to look for traffic control organized by people who aren't law enforcement too. So sometimes these people will block off roads using their own POVs. Personally owned vehicles, so like their own cars and stuff like that. If they're starting to do things like that, I would probably come back a different day or maybe go to a different protest, or maybe start your own protest or something like that. You want to listen for like the lyrics of their chants or their songs. Do they kind of incite violence? Are they saying, you know, we need to off this person or off that person or take over this or something like that? You probably want to avoid those kinds of situations or avoid those kinds of groups. Now, are they talking about doing something that, now you also want to listen to like the casual conversations that are happening around you. Are they talking to each other about, you know, passing out weapons and stuff like that? Are they talking about trying to go inside of a place that's trespassing? Something like that. Now, the smells that you're going to be looking for is, are there burning signs? Are there smells of burning? If you notice that burning smell, somebody's trying to start a fire, trying to cause damage, you need to leave. Now, every now and again, sometimes if you're either in a protest that devolves into a riot or something like that, or if you just happen to be going through the area, you might get caught up in the riot. Unfortunately, basically what this is becoming an unintentional hostage. The nice thing about this hostage situation is it's usually, because it's unintentional, your same goal is to escape. Basically same rules as a hostage situation, but there's a little bit more room for negotiation, if that makes sense. And there again, you're going to just try to negotiate, you know, like, hey, I'm just trying to get from here to there, you know, just let them know, like, hey, I'm not really a part of this. I'm just trying to run away. Usually they will let you leave. Now, if they don't let you leave, refer back to your hostage situation, because that's now an intentional hostage situation. All right, another one that happens is, another situation that happens is improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. These aren't as common, but they do happen. They can be difficult to successfully spot because most explosive devices are designed to blend in with other things around them, and that's why you want to pay attention to small details. One of the things we want to know about IEDs is there's usually 3 or 4 components to these. There's sometimes a power source. There's almost always a switch, an initiator, and a charge. The power source can obviously be some sort of battery or battery pack. It can also be something as simple as a cell phone. Not always necessary, but sometimes you can see that. And if there's weird wires coming out of a cell phone, that's a good sign that it might be an improvised explosive device that you're looking at. There's always a switch of some sort. Now, there's different types of switches. You do have, you know, regular switches. It can be simple as a jerry-rigged light switch, or it could be a egg timer. Could also be the switch. So when it goes that counts all the way down to 0, then that's when your explosion happens. And then you have an initiator, which is usually like a smaller explosion that will ignite the larger explosion. A good example of initiator is like a blasting cap, or for an artillery round. Something else that can be used is like a smaller explosion attached to a small explosive attached to like a propane tank or a large propane tank or something like that. And then the charge is obviously the main big boom, as I like to call it, the big boom of the IED. It's the part that's going to be causing the most damage. Now again, the charge doesn't always have to be, you know, C4 or something like that. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It can be one of those large gas tanks or something like that, or it can be a large propane tank with an initiator attached to that propane tank. Just something along those lines. So those are the 4 sources that you can look for. Another thing to look out for is to look out for the look out for like people wearing large coats in the middle of summer, things like that. Odd piles of garbage, and basically anything that's out of place. I do want to kind of finish this up to say, like, at the end of the day, there's not really a way to completely avoid terrorism other than hiding out under a rock out in the middle of nowhere. It's a very fluid mode of operating for these terrorists. They can think of things that nobody would have thought of. They might have been the only ones to think of something. There's always going to be new people that want to do it. And the best mindset to approaching this problem is to always be aware, prepare, and think outside of the box. And if you're watching this, I appreciate your time. I hope you gained some insight out of this, and hope you have a great day.